Question 1. The audit findings indicate that a real estate licensee in Michigan, representing a seller, has a pre-existing informal agreement with a local contractor to receive a 10% referral fee for any repair work awarded to the contractor. The seller needs significant repairs done before closing, and the licensee has recommended this specific contractor to the seller, highlighting their excellent reputation and timely service, but has not disclosed the referral fee arrangement. What is the most ethically and legally sound course of action for the licensee in this situation, according to Michigan real estate regulations and professional ethics? Option A. Accept the referral fee from the contractor after the repairs are completed and the sale closes without informing the seller, as the licensee's role was to facilitate the sale, not manage the repairs. Option B. Subtly emphasize the contractor's positive attributes to the seller while omitting any mention of the referral fee, trusting the seller will recognize the contractor's value. Option C. Immediately disclose the referral fee arrangement to the seller, explain its potential impact on their recommendation, and offer to help the seller find alternative contractors or allow the seller to make the final decision independently. Option D. Proceed with recommending the contractor, as the contractor is reputable and the seller will benefit from the repairs, and the referral fee is a standard business practice. Correct answer is C. Immediately disclose the referral fee arrangement to the seller, explain its potential impact on their recommendation, and offer to help the seller find alternative contractors or allow the seller to make the final decision independently. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential conflict of interest and a breach of fiduciary duty, which are central to ethical real estate practice in Michigan. This scenario is professionally challenging because it pits a licensee's personal financial gain against their obligation to their client and the integrity of the transaction. The licensee must navigate a situation where their advice could be influenced by an undisclosed personal benefit, potentially compromising the client's best interests. Careful judgment is required to uphold professional standards and avoid even the appearance of impropriety. The best professional approach involves full disclosure and prioritizing the client's interests above personal gain. This means immediately informing the seller about the potential for a referral fee from the contractor, explaining how this arrangement could influence the licensee's recommendation, and offering to recuse themselves from recommending specific contractors or facilitating the repair agreement. This approach aligns with Michigan's real estate licensing laws, which mandate honesty, integrity, and the avoidance of misrepresentation or concealment of material facts. It also adheres to general ethical principles requiring licensees to act as fiduciaries, placing the client's welfare at the forefront. By disclosing the potential conflict, the licensee empowers the seller to make an informed decision, thereby protecting the client and maintaining professional integrity. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with recommending the contractor without disclosing the referral fee. This failure to disclose a material fact, especially one that could influence the licensee's judgment, directly violates Michigan's statutory requirements for honesty and fair dealing. It creates a secret benefit for the licensee that is not shared with the client, constituting a breach of fiduciary duty and potentially leading to a claim of misrepresentation or fraud. Another incorrect approach would be to subtly steer the seller towards the contractor without explicitly mentioning the referral fee, perhaps by highlighting only the contractor's perceived strengths while downplaying any potential drawbacks. This constitutes a form of deception by omission and manipulation, undermining the client's ability to make an independent and informed choice. It violates the ethical obligation to provide objective advice and act in the client's best interest. Finally, accepting the referral fee and proceeding with the transaction without any disclosure, while continuing to represent the seller, is a severe ethical and legal violation. This action prioritizes personal financial gain over the client's welfare and demonstrates a blatant disregard for the trust placed in the licensee. It is a direct contravention of the principles of fiduciary responsibility and the legal requirements for licensed real estate professionals in Michigan. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying potential conflicts of interest. Once identified, the next step is to assess the materiality of the conflict and its potential impact on the client. Full and timely disclosure to the client is paramount. If the conflict cannot be mitigated through disclosure and client consent, the professional should consider withdrawing from the transaction or advising the client to seek independent counsel or representation. Maintaining transparency and prioritizing client interests are the cornerstones of ethical real estate practice. Question 2. The audit findings indicate that a real estate licensee in Michigan has listed a property primarily used for the cultivation and harvesting of crops, which also includes a farmhouse and a barn. The licensee is considering how to best categorize this property for marketing and representation purposes. Which of the following classifications most accurately reflects the primary nature of this property according to Michigan's real estate regulatory framework? Option A, agricultural real estate. Option B, industrial real estate. Option C, residential real estate. Option D, commercial real estate. The correct answer is A, agricultural real estate. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the licensee to accurately classify a property based on its primary use, which directly impacts the type of real estate license endorsement or specialized knowledge required for representation in Michigan. Misclassifying a property can lead to representing clients in transactions for which the licensee is not adequately prepared or licensed, potentially violating Michigan's real estate laws and regulations, and exposing the client to undue risk. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between the primary purpose of the land and any secondary or incidental uses. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves identifying the primary use of the property as defined by Michigan real estate law and common practice. In this case, the property's primary purpose is the cultivation and harvesting of crops, which clearly aligns with the definition of agricultural real estate. A licensee should recognize that while there might be a dwelling on the property, its existence is ancillary to the farming operation. This approach ensures compliance with Michigan's licensing requirements and demonstrates competence in representing clients in agricultural transactions, which often involve unique considerations such as zoning, water rights, and agricultural easements. Incorrect approach is analysis. Representing the property as residential real estate would be incorrect because the dwelling, while present, is not the primary purpose of the land. Michigan law and professional standards differentiate between properties where the dwelling is the sole or primary focus and those where the land's agricultural use is paramount. Failing to recognize this distinction could lead to misrepresentation and a failure to adequately advise the client on the specific nuances of an agricultural sale. Classifying the property as commercial real estate is also incorrect. Commercial real estate typically refers to properties used for business purposes such as retail, office, or hospitality, while farming is a business. The specific classification of agricultural is distinct and carries its own set of regulations and market considerations within Michigan. Using the broader commercial label would overlook the specialized nature of the transaction. Treating the property as industrial real estate is fundamentally incorrect. Industrial real estate is associated with manufacturing, production, warehousing, and heavy industry. The activities described, crop cultivation, bear no resemblance to industrial operations and would therefore be a gross misclassification, demonstrating a lack of understanding of basic real estate categories. Professional reasoning. Professionals should always prioritize accurate property classification based on its primary use. This involves understanding the definitions and distinctions between residential, commercial, industrial, and agricultural real estate as recognized by Michigan law and industry practice. When in doubt, licensees should consult with experienced colleagues, mentors, or relevant regulatory bodies to ensure correct classification, and to confirm they possess the necessary expertise or endorsements to represent clients effectively and ethically in that specific property type. Question 3. The monitoring system at a property in Michigan, which you are listing for sale, has indicated potential soil contamination. As the listing broker, what is the most responsible and legally compliant course of action to take regarding this environmental concern? Option A. Advise the seller of the monitoring system's findings. Explain their legal obligation to disclose this potential material fact under Michigan law, and recommend obtaining a professional environmental assessment to determine the nature and extent of any contamination. Option B. Advise the seller to ignore the monitoring system's findings and proceed with marketing the property without disclosing any potential environmental issues. Option C. Inform potential buyers immediately about the potential soil contamination indicated by the monitoring system, without first consulting the seller or obtaining a professional assessment. Option D. Downplay the significance of the monitoring system's findings to the seller, suggesting it might be a false positive and that the issue can be addressed after the sale. The correct answer is A. Advise the seller of the monitoring system's findings. Explain their legal obligation to disclose this potential material fact under Michigan law, and recommend obtaining a professional environmental assessment to determine the nature and extent of any contamination. Explanation: the monitoring system demonstrates a potential environmental concern that could significantly impact the value and marketability of a property in Michigan. This scenario is professionally challenging because real estate licensees must balance their fiduciary duties to clients with their legal obligations to disclose material facts, including environmental hazards, while also navigating complex regulations. Failure to properly address such issues can lead to legal liability, ethical breaches, and damage to professional reputation. The best professional approach involves immediate and transparent communication with the seller about the detected environmental issue. This includes advising the seller on their legal obligation to disclose this material fact to potential buyers, as mandated by Michigan's environmental laws and real estate licensing regulations. The licensee should then recommend that the seller obtain a professional environmental assessment to determine the nature, extent, and remediation options for the contamination. This proactive stance ensures full disclosure, allows for informed decision-making by all parties, and mitigates the licensee's risk by adhering to legal and ethical standards. This approach aligns with the Michigan Real Estate License Law's requirement to disclose known material defects and the general ethical duty of honesty and fair dealing. An approach that involves downplaying the significance of the monitoring system's findings to the seller, hoping it will not deter potential buyers, is ethically and legally unacceptable. This constitutes a failure to disclose a material fact, which is a violation of Michigan real estate law and professional conduct standards. Such an action prioritizes the transaction over the client's and potential buyers' right to accurate information. Another unacceptable approach is to immediately inform potential buyers of the detected issue without first discussing it with the seller and recommending a professional assessment. While disclosure is crucial, bypassing the seller and prematurely alarming buyers without verified information can lead to unnecessary panic, potential legal disputes with the seller, and could be seen as exceeding the licensee's authority or acting in bad faith toward their client. Finally, an approach that suggests ignoring the monitoring system's findings altogether and proceeding with the sale as if no issue exists is a severe breach of professional duty and legal compliance. This is a direct violation of Michigan's disclosure requirements and exposes both the seller and the licensee to significant legal repercussions, including lawsuits for misrepresentation and potential license revocation. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, legal compliance, and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Identifying potential material facts or concerns. 2. Consulting relevant Michigan statutes and regulations, e.g., Michigan Environmental Protection Act, Seller Disclosure Act, Real Estate License Law. 3. Communicating findings and legal obligations clearly and promptly to the client. 4. Recommending expert consultation for verification and assessment. 5. Facilitating informed disclosure to all parties. 6. Documenting all communications and actions. Question 4. The monitoring system demonstrates that a real estate salesperson in Michigan is actively assisting a client with securing financing for a property purchase. The salesperson has a relationship with a specific mortgage lender who offers competitive rates and a generous referral bonus to the salesperson for each closed loan. The salesperson is considering how to best guide their client through the financing process. Which of the following represents the most ethically sound and legally compliant approach for the Michigan real estate salesperson? Option A. Advise the client on the general types of financing available, encourage them to shop around with multiple lenders, and disclose any potential referral relationships if they choose to work with a specific lender. Option B. Strongly recommend the mortgage lender with whom the salesperson has a referral bonus agreement, highlighting that this lender is preferred and often provides the best service. Option C. Offer to pre-qualify the client for a mortgage through the preferred lender, assuring them that this will expedite the process and secure the best possible terms. Option D. Focus solely on the property's features and price, leaving all financing discussions and decisions entirely to the client without any guidance or education on the financing landscape. The correct answer is A. Advise the client on the general types of financing available, encourage them to shop around with multiple lenders, and disclose any potential referral relationships if they choose to work with a specific lender. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate salesperson in Michigan to navigate the complexities of financing options while prioritizing the client's best interests and adhering to disclosure requirements under Michigan law. The salesperson must avoid steering clients towards specific lenders or loan products that might not be the most suitable for their financial situation, even if it means a lower commission for the salesperson. The best professional approach involves thoroughly educating the client on various financing options available, including different types of mortgages, interest rates, and loan terms, and then empowering them to make an informed decision. This includes advising them to consult with multiple lenders and financial advisors to compare offers. This approach aligns with the fiduciary duty owed to the client and the principles of fair dealing and transparency, mandated by Michigan's real estate licensing laws and ethical standards, which emphasize acting in the client's best interest and providing accurate, complete information. An incorrect approach would be to recommend a specific mortgage broker or lender without disclosing any potential referral fees or benefits the salesperson might receive. This creates a conflict of interest and violates the duty of loyalty and full disclosure. Michigan law requires licensees to disclose any potential conflicts of interest, including financial incentives from third-party service providers. Another incorrect approach is to pressure the client into accepting a particular loan product because it offers a higher commission to the salesperson. This prioritizes the salesperson's financial gain over the client's needs and constitutes a breach of ethical conduct and potentially violates Michigan's consumer protection laws related to real estate transactions. A further incorrect approach is to provide financial advice or guarantee loan approval, as real estate licensees are not qualified or licensed to offer such services. This can lead to misrepresentation and legal liability for the salesperson and the brokerage. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a commitment to client education, transparency, and ethical conduct, always prioritizing the client's financial well-being and ensuring compliance with all applicable Michigan real estate regulations. Question 5. Strategic planning requires a Michigan real estate salesperson to guide a first-time homebuyer through the complexities of mortgage financing. Considering the client's stable employment history and stated intention to remain in the home for at least 15 years, which of the following approaches best aligns with ethical practice and Michigan's regulatory framework for mortgage recommendations? Option A. Advocate for the mortgage product that offers the highest commission to the salesperson, regardless of its suitability for the client's stated long-term financial goals. Option B. Recommend a fixed-rate mortgage, explaining how the consistent interest rate provides payment predictability and protection against future market fluctuations, which is beneficial for long-term homeownership. Option C. Propose an interest-only mortgage, highlighting the reduced initial monthly payments and the flexibility it offers, without extensively detailing the lack of principal reduction and the eventual balloon payment. Option D. Suggest an adjustable rate mortgage with a low initial introductory rate, emphasizing the immediate savings on monthly payments without dwelling on the potential for future rate increases. The correct answer is B. Recommend a fixed-rate mortgage, explaining how the consistent interest rate provides payment predictability and protection against future market fluctuations, which is beneficial for long-term homeownership. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a salesperson to accurately assess a client's financial situation and long-term goals to recommend the most suitable mortgage product, adhering to Michigan's licensing regulations and ethical standards. Misrepresenting or failing to adequately explain mortgage types can lead to significant financial harm for the client and regulatory penalties for the licensee. Careful judgment is required to balance client needs with product suitability and regulatory compliance. The correct approach involves a thorough needs assessment and clear explanation of mortgage options. This includes understanding the client's income stability, risk tolerance, and how long they intend to stay in the property. For a client with a stable income and long-term plans, a fixed-rate mortgage offers predictable monthly payments, shielding them from interest rate fluctuations. This aligns with the ethical duty to act in the client's best interest and the regulatory expectation under Michigan law that licensees provide accurate and understandable information about mortgage products. An incorrect approach involves recommending an adjustable rate mortgage (ARM) solely because it offers a lower initial interest rate without fully explaining the potential for future payment increases. This fails to adequately inform the client of the risks associated with fluctuating interest rates, potentially leading to payment shock and financial distress, which violates the duty of care and the principle of full disclosure mandated by Michigan's real estate licensing laws. Another incorrect approach is suggesting an interest-only mortgage without a comprehensive discussion of the long-term implications. While it can lower initial payments, it does not build equity and leaves the borrower with the full principal balance to repay at the end of the term, often requiring a balloon payment. Failing to thoroughly explain this structure and its potential impact on the client's financial future is a failure to provide adequate advice and could be considered misleading under Michigan's consumer protection statutes related to financial products. Finally, pushing a specific mortgage product without considering the client's individual circumstances, such as a fixed-rate mortgage for someone who plans to sell the property within a few years, is also an incorrect approach. This demonstrates a lack of client-centric advice and prioritizes a sale over the client's best interests, which is contrary to the ethical obligations of a licensed real estate professional in Michigan. The professional decision-making process should always begin with active listening and a detailed client needs analysis. This should be followed by a clear, unbiased explanation of all suitable mortgage options, highlighting the pros and cons of each in relation to the client's stated goals and financial profile. Transparency regarding risks and long-term implications is paramount, ensuring the client can make an informed decision. Question 6. Stakeholder feedback indicates a need for clearer guidance on handling situations where a financing contingency in a Michigan real estate purchase agreement is not met by the agreed-upon deadline. A seller in Grand Rapids has contacted their licensee expressing frustration that the buyer has not secured financing by the contract's specified date and is now asking for their earnest money back. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Michigan real estate licensee to advise the seller? Option A. Advise the seller that they can unilaterally declare the contract void and immediately relist the property for sale. Option B. Advise the seller to pressure the buyer to close on the property despite the lack of secured financing. Option C. Advise the seller to keep the earnest money deposit as liquidated damages since the financing deadline was missed. Option D. Advise the seller that the buyer is likely released from the contract due to the unmet financing contingency and recommend consulting with legal counsel to formally document the termination and protect their interests. The correct answer is D. Advise the seller that the buyer is likely released from the contract due to the unmet financing contingency and recommend consulting with legal counsel to formally document the termination and protect their interests. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for real estate licensees in Michigan, navigating the enforceability of a purchase agreement when a critical contingency is not met by the specified deadline. The professional challenge lies in advising the client appropriately, balancing their desire to proceed with the legal realities of contract law and Michigan's specific real estate regulations. Misinterpreting the contract's terms or Michigan law could lead to significant legal disputes, financial losses for the client, and potential disciplinary action against the licensee. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a thorough review of the purchase agreement's financing contingency clause and an understanding of Michigan contract law regarding deadlines and waivers. This approach recognizes that the financing contingency is a condition precedent to the buyer's obligation to purchase. If the financing is not secured by the specified date, the buyer typically has the right to terminate the agreement without penalty, unless they have explicitly waived that contingency. Advising the seller that the buyer is likely released from the contract due to the unmet contingency and recommending consultation with legal counsel to formally document the termination and protect their interests aligns with Michigan's principles of contract enforceability and the licensee's duty of care. This approach prioritizes adherence to the contract's terms and Michigan law, ensuring the client's rights are protected and potential liabilities are minimized. Incorrect approach is analysis. Advising the seller to simply keep the earnest money deposit without further legal consultation is problematic. While the deposit is often forfeited if the buyer defaults, the buyer may have a valid defense if a contingency was not met and not waived. Proceeding without confirming the buyer's intent or legal standing could lead to a lawsuit, suggesting the seller can unilaterally declare the contract void and immediately relist the property ignores the buyer's potential rights and the need for a mutual agreement or a court order to terminate the contract formally. This could expose the seller to claims of breach of contract. Encouraging the seller to pressure the buyer into closing despite the unmet financing contingency is unethical and potentially illegal. It disregards the buyer's contractual rights and could be construed as coercion, leading to severe legal repercussions for both the seller and the licensee. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Michigan must prioritize a deep understanding of contract law as it applies to real estate transactions. When faced with unmet contingencies, the decision-making process should involve 1. Meticulously reviewing the specific contract language, paying close attention to deadlines and waiver clauses. 2. Understanding the implications of Michigan's contract law regarding the enforceability of such contingencies. 3. Advising clients on their legal rights and obligations based on the contract and applicable law. And 4. Strongly recommending consultation with legal counsel for complex situations or when formal contract termination is required. This ensures that advice is legally sound, ethically responsible, and protects all parties involved. Question 7. Governance review demonstrates that a licensed real estate agent in Michigan is showing properties to a prospective buyer who explicitly states they are only interested in neighborhoods with a specific racial demographic and asks the agent to only show them homes in those areas. What is the most appropriate course of action for the agent to take? Option A. Ignore the buyer's discriminatory statement and continue to show properties as originally planned, without addressing the racial preference or the legal implications. Option B. Agree to the buyer's request and exclusively show them properties located within the desired demographic areas, ensuring no properties outside these boundaries are presented. Option C. Subtly steer the buyer towards neighborhoods that align with their stated demographic preference, without explicitly mentioning race, by highlighting perceived amenities or community feel that are coded language for racial composition. Option D. Politely refuse the buyer's discriminatory request and explain that showing properties based on race is illegal under federal and Michigan fair housing laws, offering to show them available properties in all areas that meet their other stated criteria. Correct answer is D. Politely refuse the buyer's discriminatory request and explain that showing properties based on race is illegal under federal and Michigan fair housing laws, offering to show them available properties in all areas that meet their other stated criteria. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate licensee to navigate a situation where a client's request, if acted upon, would violate federal and state fair housing laws. The licensee must balance their duty to their client with their legal and ethical obligations. A failure to do so could result in significant legal penalties, license revocation, and damage to their professional reputation. The best professional approach involves politely but firmly refusing the client's discriminatory request and educating them on the relevant fair housing laws. This approach directly addresses the illegality of the request, upholds the licensee's ethical duties, and seeks to guide the client toward lawful and non-discriminatory housing choices. Specifically, under the Fair Housing Act of 1968 as amended, and Michigan's Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act, it is illegal to discriminate in the sale or rental of housing based on race, color, religion, sex, familial status, national origin, or disability. Refusing to show properties based on a protected characteristic is a violation. By explaining these laws, the licensee is fulfilling their obligation to act with integrity and competence, and to avoid practices that are discriminatory. An approach that involves subtly steering the client towards or away from certain neighborhoods based on their protected characteristics, even if not explicitly stated, is a violation of fair housing laws. This indirect discrimination is still illegal and undermines the principles of equal housing opportunity. Such an action would be a failure to uphold the licensee's duty to provide equal service to all clients. Another unacceptable approach is to agree to the client's request and proceed with showing only properties that meet their discriminatory criteria. This directly violates the Fair Housing Act and the Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act. It constitutes active participation in discriminatory housing practices, which carries severe legal consequences. Finally, an approach that involves ignoring the request and proceeding with business as usual without addressing the discriminatory nature of the client's instructions is also professionally deficient. While it may avoid direct complicity, it fails to educate the client and prevent potential future discriminatory actions. A responsible licensee has a duty to address and correct discriminatory requests when they arise. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Identifying the legal and ethical implications of the client's request. 2. Consulting relevant laws and regulations, in this case, the Fair Housing Act and the Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act. 3. Communicating clearly and professionally with the client, explaining the legal boundaries and offering lawful alternatives. 4. Documenting the interaction and the licensee's response. Question 8. The evaluation methodology shows that a real estate investor in Michigan is considering two distinct financing strategies for acquiring a distressed property: obtaining a hard money loan or arranging seller financing. As a licensed Michigan real estate salesperson, what is the most appropriate course of action to ethically and legally guide this investor? Option A. Provide a detailed explanation of both hard money loans and seller financing, outlining their typical terms, risks, and benefits, and advise the investor to consult with independent financial and legal professionals to determine the best fit for their specific situation. Option B. Actively seek out and present hard money loan offers to the investor, leveraging your network of private lenders to secure the fastest possible funding for the property acquisition. Option C. Negotiate the terms of seller financing directly with the seller on behalf of the investor, emphasizing the benefits of a quick sale and downplaying any potential risks associated with the seller's financing terms. Option D. Recommend seller financing as the superior option due to its perceived simplicity and lower upfront costs, without thoroughly exploring the investor's financial capacity or the potential complexities of the seller's agreement. The correct answer is A. Provide a detailed explanation of both hard money loans and seller financing, outlining their typical terms, risks, and benefits, and advise the investor to consult with independent financial and legal professionals to determine the best fit for their specific situation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate salesperson in Michigan to understand the nuances of different financing options, specifically hard money loans and seller financing, and how they impact a client's investment strategy and the salesperson's ethical obligations. The salesperson must not only grasp the mechanics of these loans, but also advise clients appropriately without engaging in unlicensed lending activities or misrepresenting the risks involved. Careful judgment is required to ensure the client's best interests are met, while adhering to Michigan's real estate licensing laws and ethical standards. The best approach involves a thorough explanation of both hard money loans and seller financing, highlighting their respective advantages, disadvantages, and suitability for different investor profiles. This includes clearly outlining the higher interest rates and shorter terms of hard money loans, and the potential for negotiation and flexibility with seller financing. Crucially, the salesperson must emphasize that their role is advisory regarding the financing options available to facilitate a real estate transaction, not to provide direct lending services or guarantee loan terms. This aligns with Michigan's real estate licensing laws, which prohibit unlicensed individuals from engaging in lending activities. The salesperson's duty is to educate the client on available financing structures that can support their investment goals, empowering them to make informed decisions with qualified lenders or the seller. An incorrect approach would be to actively solicit or arrange hard money loans on behalf of the client, implying the salesperson is a direct lender or loan broker. This could violate Michigan's laws governing mortgage lending and brokering, requiring specific licenses that a real estate salesperson typically does not possess. Another incorrect approach is to present seller financing as a guaranteed solution without adequately disclosing the potential risks to the buyer, such as the seller's ability to foreclose or the terms of the agreement. This could be considered misrepresentation or a failure to act in the client's best interest, potentially violating ethical duties. Furthermore, steering a client exclusively towards one financing option without a balanced discussion of alternatives, based on the salesperson's personal preference rather than the client's needs, is professionally unsound and ethically questionable. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes client education and informed consent. This involves understanding the client's financial situation, investment goals, and risk tolerance. The salesperson should then present a comprehensive overview of relevant financing options, including their pros and cons, and advise the client to consult with qualified financial professionals, such as mortgage brokers or attorneys, for specific loan arrangements and legal advice. The salesperson's expertise lies in facilitating the real estate transaction itself, not in providing financial lending services. Question 9. Benchmark analysis indicates that a Michigan real estate salesperson is advising a seller on the likely sale price of their owner-occupied single-family home located in a well-established suburban neighborhood. The property is not unique in its construction or features, and the seller's primary goal is to sell the home within a reasonable timeframe at competitive market price. Which valuation method should the salesperson primarily rely on to provide the most accurate and ethically sound advice to the seller? Option A. A comparative market analysis that identifies and adjusts for differences between the subject property and recently sold comparable single-family homes in the immediate vicinity. Option B. An income approach that estimates the potential rental income the property could generate and applies a capitalization rate to determine its market value. Option C. A cost approach that calculates the cost to replace the home's structure, subtracts accrued depreciation, and adds the land value. Option D. A combination of the income and cost approaches, as these methods provide a more comprehensive view of value than a single approach. The correct answer is A. A comparative market analysis that identifies and adjusts for differences between the subject property and recently sold comparable single-family homes in the immediate vicinity. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because a real estate salesperson in Michigan must accurately and ethically advise a seller on the likely sale price of their property. Misrepresenting value, whether intentionally or through flawed methodology, can lead to significant financial harm for the seller, damage the salesperson's reputation, and potentially violate Michigan's real estate licensing laws and ethical standards. The salesperson must select the most appropriate valuation method based on the property type and market conditions, ensuring the advice provided is grounded in sound professional practice and regulatory compliance. The most appropriate approach for determining the likely sale price of a single-family home in a developed neighborhood is the comparative market analysis. This method involves identifying recently sold properties similar to the subject property in terms of location, size, features, and condition, and then making adjustments for any differences. This approach is correct because it directly reflects current market activity and buyer behavior, which are the primary drivers of sale price for residential properties. Michigan's real estate licensing laws and the National Association of Realtors Registered Code of Ethics, which Michigan licensees are often bound by through membership, emphasize providing competent and accurate information to clients. A comparative market analysis, when performed diligently, offers the most direct and relevant indication of what a buyer is likely willing to pay in the current market. Using the income approach would be inappropriate and potentially misleading for a single-family residence, not primarily purchased for its rental income potential. This method focuses on the income a property can generate, which is more relevant for investment properties like apartment buildings or commercial spaces. Relying on it for typical home sale would ignore the primary motivations of most residential buyers and could result in an inaccurate valuation. This failure to select the appropriate valuation method constitutes a lack of competence and could lead to providing misleading information to the seller, violating ethical duties. The cost approach, which estimates the cost to replace or reproduce the property, less depreciation, is also not the best primary method for a typical residential sale. While it can be useful for unique properties or new construction, it often overestimates value in established neighborhoods because it doesn't directly account for market demand or buyer preferences for existing homes. Buyers typically do not pay the cost to build a new home. They pay based on what similar existing homes are selling for. Employing this method without considering market comparables would fail to provide the seller with a realistic expectation of sale price, potentially leading to overpricing and a prolonged listing period, which is detrimental to the client's interests and a breach of professional duty. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes client best interests and regulatory compliance. This involves first understanding the property type and its primary purpose, e.g., owner-occupied residence, investment property. Then, they should identify the most relevant valuation method for that property type and market context. For a standard residential property in a developed area, a comparative market analysis is almost always the most reliable indicator of market value. If there are unique aspects or the property has investment potential, other approaches might be considered as supplementary, but the comparative market analysis should form the core of the valuation advice. Always ensure the analysis is thorough, well-documented, and clearly communicated to the client, explaining the rationale behind the chosen method and the resulting value range. Question 10. Quality control measures reveal that a real estate salesperson in Michigan is explaining financing options to a potential buyer. The buyer is seeking a mortgage for a property appraised at $300,000, and the lender has approved a loan amount of $240,000. What is the correct loan-to-value (LTV) ratio for this transaction, and which calculation method accurately represents this ratio? Option A. The LTV is 75%, calculated by dividing the loan amount $240,000 by the appraised value $300,000 and multiplying by 100, then subtracting 5%. Option B. The LTV is 80%, calculated by dividing the loan amount $240,000 by the purchase price $300,000 and multiplying by 100. Option C. The LTV is 20%, calculated by dividing the down payment $60,000 by the appraised value $300,000 and multiplying by 100. Option D. The LTV is 80%, calculated by dividing the loan amount $240,000 by the appraised value $300,000 and multiplying by 100. The correct answer is D. The LTV is 80%, calculated by dividing the loan amount $240,000 by the appraised value $300,000 and multiplying by 100. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in real estate financing, where a salesperson must accurately calculate and explain loan-to-value ratios to a client. Miscalculations or misinterpretations can lead to significant financial consequences for the buyer and potential liability for the salesperson. Adherence to Michigan's licensing laws and ethical standards regarding client representation and accurate financial disclosure is paramount. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves accurately calculating the loan-to-value ratio by dividing the loan amount by the property's appraised value and then multiplying by 100 to express it as a percentage. This approach directly addresses the client's need for clear, factual information about their financing options. Michigan law requires real estate licensees to act with honesty and integrity, and providing accurate financial calculations is a fundamental aspect of this duty. This method ensures the client understands the relationship between the loan amount and the property's worth, which is crucial for informed decision-making. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves calculating the loan-to-value ratio by dividing the down payment by the property's appraised value. This calculation yields the equity percentage, not the loan-to-value ratio, and would mislead the client about the extent of their borrowing relative to the property's worth. This misrepresentation violates the duty of honesty and could lead to the client misunderstanding their financial obligations. Another incorrect approach is to calculate the loan-to-value ratio by dividing the loan amount by the purchase price without considering the appraised value. While often similar, the appraised value is the critical figure for lenders in determining the LTV. Using the purchase price when it differs from the appraisal could result in an inaccurate LTV, potentially misrepresenting the loan terms and violating the principle of providing accurate information. A further incorrect approach is to estimate the loan-to-value ratio based on general market knowledge without performing a precise calculation. This casual estimation lacks the accuracy required by professional standards and Michigan's regulatory framework. It fails to provide the client with the concrete data necessary for a sound financial decision and could be construed as negligence or a lack of diligence. Professional reasoning. Professionals should always prioritize accuracy and transparency in financial dealings. When faced with calculations, it is essential to use the correct formulas and data. A systematic approach involving verifying all input figures, loan amount, appraised value, and applying the standard LTV formula ensures compliance with regulatory requirements and upholds ethical obligations to clients. If unsure about a calculation, seeking clarification or consulting reliable resources is a sign of professional responsibility. Question 11. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a real estate licensee operating in Michigan must provide clients with accurate market insights. Which of the following actions best demonstrates a comprehensive understanding of the economic factors influencing the Michigan real estate market? Option A. Relying exclusively on national real estate market reports and forecasts to advise clients on Michigan property values. Option B. Focusing solely on historical sales data from the past 5 years without considering current economic forecasts for Michigan. Option C. Ignoring the impact of current interest rate fluctuations, assuming they affect all markets equally and predictably. Option D. Analyzing current Michigan employment rates, recent population migration patterns within the state, and the prevailing interest rate environment to forecast market trends. The correct answer is D. Analyzing current Michigan employment rates, recent population migration patterns within the state, and the prevailing interest rate environment to forecast market trends. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Michigan real estate licensee because it requires navigating the complex interplay between local economic conditions and their direct impact on property values and market activity. A licensee must demonstrate an understanding of how macroeconomic factors, such as interest rate fluctuations and employment trends, translate into tangible market shifts within a specific geographic area like Michigan. Failure to accurately assess and communicate these influences can lead to misinformed advice for clients, potentially resulting in financial losses for buyers and sellers, and damage to the licensee's reputation and professional standing. This necessitates a nuanced approach that goes beyond simply listing properties and requires a deep understanding of the economic forces at play. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a comprehensive analysis of Michigan's current economic indicators, including local employment rates, recent population migration trends, and the prevailing interest rate environment. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the core of the question by linking observable economic factors to their likely impact on the Michigan real estate market. Michigan law and professional ethics require licensees to possess and apply knowledge of market conditions to advise clients competently. By examining these specific indicators, a licensee can provide informed opinions on market trends, property valuations, and potential investment opportunities or risks, thereby fulfilling their fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest. Incorrect approach is analysis. Focusing solely on national real estate trends without considering Michigan-specific data is an incorrect approach. While national trends can provide a broad context, they often fail to capture the unique economic drivers and market dynamics present within a particular state. Michigan's economy, for instance, may be heavily influenced by the automotive industry or specific manufacturing sectors, which can diverge significantly from national averages. Relying on generic market forecasts without local validation can lead to inaccurate assessments of property values and market absorption rates in Michigan. Another incorrect approach is to disregard the impact of interest rate changes, assuming they have a uniform effect across all markets. Interest rates significantly influence buyer affordability and borrowing capacity, directly impacting demand and consequently property prices. Ignoring this crucial economic factor means failing to account for a primary driver of real estate market activity and buyer behavior within Michigan. Finally, concentrating only on historical sales data without considering current economic forecasts is an incomplete and potentially misleading strategy. While historical data provides a baseline, it does not account for future economic shifts that are likely to influence the market. A forward-looking analysis that incorporates current economic indicators and projections is essential for providing relevant and actionable advice to clients in the dynamic Michigan real estate market. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic approach to market analysis. This begins with identifying the specific geographic market, in this case, Michigan. Next, gather relevant data, prioritizing local and state-level economic indicators over purely national ones. This includes employment statistics, wage growth, population changes, major industry performance, and local development projects. Concurrently, Assess broader economic factors like interest rates and inflation, and then critically evaluate how these national trends are likely to manifest within the specific Michigan context. Finally, synthesize this information to form a well-reasoned opinion on market conditions, and communicate these findings clearly and ethically to clients, always emphasizing that market conditions are subject to change. Question 12. Governance review demonstrates that a licensed real estate salesperson in Michigan is representing a buyer interested in purchasing a property. During the course of negotiations, the salesperson learns that the seller is their sibling. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the salesperson to take immediately? Option A. Proceed with the transaction as planned, assuming the familial relationship will not influence their professional judgment or the buyer's decision, and only mention it if directly asked. Option B. Inform their buyer client verbally about the sibling relationship, but continue to manage the transaction without further written documentation of the disclosure. Option C. Immediately disclose their familial relationship with the seller to their buyer client in writing, explaining how this relationship might be perceived and offering to withdraw from representing the buyer if the client wishes. Option D. Advise their buyer client to accept the seller's offer without disclosing the familial relationship, believing the offer is favorable and their siblings' involvement is irrelevant to the buyer's best interests. The correct answer is C. Immediately disclose their familial relationship with the seller to their buyer client in writing, explaining how this relationship might be perceived and offering to withdraw from representing the buyer if the client wishes. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves a potential conflict of interest and requires adherence to strict disclosure requirements under Michigan real estate law. A licensee must navigate their personal interest in a property while fulfilling their fiduciary duties to a client and maintaining transparency. Failure to do so can lead to disciplinary action, financial penalties, and damage to professional reputation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice is to immediately disclose the licensee's personal interest in the property to their client in writing. This approach aligns directly with Michigan's real estate law, specifically the principles of agency and disclosure. Michigan law mandates that real estate licensees owe a duty of loyalty and full disclosure to their clients. By proactively informing the client about the licensee's familial relationship and potential benefit from the sale, the licensee upholds their fiduciary duty, allows the client to make an informed decision, and avoids any appearance of impropriety. This transparency is crucial for maintaining trust and adhering to ethical standards. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed with the transaction without disclosing the familial relationship, assuming it won't affect the client's decision. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Michigan law requires disclosure of any material facts that could influence a client's decision, and a personal interest, even if familial, can be perceived as influencing the licensee's advice or actions. This omission violates the duty of loyalty and good faith owed to the client. Another incorrect approach is to only disclose the relationship verbally to the client. While verbal disclosure is a step, Michigan real estate regulations often emphasize written disclosures for important matters to ensure a clear record and prevent misunderstandings. Relying solely on verbal communication leaves room for disputes about whether and how the disclosure was made, and it does not provide the client with a tangible document to review and retain. This falls short of the robust disclosure standards expected. A third incorrect approach is to advise the client to accept the offer without disclosing the familial connection, rationalizing that the offer is strong. This is particularly egregious as it combines non-disclosure with potentially biased advice. The licensee's personal interest could subconsciously or consciously influence their recommendation, even if they believe they are acting in the client's best interest. This violates the core principle of providing objective advice and acting solely for the client's benefit, free from personal gain considerations. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Michigan should adopt a proactive and transparent approach to disclosures. When a potential conflict of interest arises, such as a personal relationship with a party involved in a transaction, the immediate step should be to document and communicate this information in writing to all relevant parties, especially the client. This establishes a clear record of disclosure, allows for informed consent, and mitigates the risk of future disputes or regulatory violations. The guiding principle is always to prioritize the client's interests and maintain the highest standards of honesty and integrity. Question 13. During the evaluation of a potential listing in Grand Rapids, Michigan, a seller expresses a strong desire to exclude a small, detached shed that has been on the property for many years, as well as any potential mineral rights beneath the land, believing these are separate from the house and land sale. As a licensed Michigan real estate salesperson, how should you best address this situation to ensure compliance with Michigan law and ethical practice? Option A. Explain to the seller that under Michigan law, real estate includes the land, all permanent structures, and associated rights, and that the shed is likely a fixture. Discuss how mineral rights are also legally part of the real property unless specifically severed, and advise that all these elements should be addressed in the listing agreement and purchase agreement to avoid future disputes. Option B. Inform the seller that mineral rights are rarely a significant factor in residential sales in Michigan and can generally be disregarded in the listing agreement unless the buyer specifically inquires about them. Option C. Assure the seller that you will do your best to exclude the shed and any mineral rights from the sale, as their primary concern is maximizing the sale price of the house itself. Option D. Advise the seller that personal property is not part of a real estate transaction, and since the shed is detached, it can be easily removed by them before closing. The correct answer is A. Explain to the seller that under Michigan law, real estate includes the land, all permanent structures, and associated rights, and that the shed is likely a fixture. Discuss how mineral rights are also legally part of the real property unless specifically severed, and advise that all these elements should be addressed in the listing agreement and purchase agreement to avoid future disputes. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate salesperson to balance the immediate financial interests of a seller with their fiduciary duties and the broader legal definition of real estate, which extends beyond just the physical structure. A careful judgment is required to ensure all parties understand the scope of the transaction and the legal implications. The best approach involves clearly defining real estate according to Michigan law, which encompasses not only the land and buildings, but also the rights associated with ownership, such as easements and mineral rights. This approach is correct because it aligns with the Michigan compiled laws, specifically those defining real property and the duties of licensed real estate professionals. By educating the seller on the comprehensive definition of real estate, the salesperson upholds their duty of full disclosure and loyalty, ensuring the seller makes an informed decision about what is being conveyed. This proactive communication prevents potential disputes and legal complications arising from misunderstandings about what is included in the sale. An approach that focuses solely on the physical structure and immediate sale price fails to acknowledge the full scope of real estate as defined by Michigan law. This oversight constitutes a breach of the salesperson's fiduciary duty to act in the seller's best interest by not fully informing them of all aspects of the property being sold, including appurtenant rights or encumbrances that might affect value or transferability. Another incorrect approach, which prioritizes the seller's immediate desire to exclude certain items without proper legal consideration, risks misrepresenting the property and violating disclosure requirements. Michigan law mandates that all fixtures and appurtenances that are part of the real property must be included in the sale unless specifically excluded and agreed upon in writing. Finally, an approach that dismisses the seller's concerns about less tangible aspects of the property, such as mineral rights or easements, as irrelevant to the sale price, is also professionally unsound. These elements are legally part of the real estate and can significantly impact its value and future use, and a responsible salesperson must ensure the seller understands their implications. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the legal definition of real estate in Michigan. This involves consulting relevant statutes and case law. Next, they must assess the client's understanding and clearly communicate all aspects of the property, including rights and potential encumbrances, in a manner that is easily understood. Finally, they must ensure all agreements accurately reflect the informed understanding of all parties involved, prioritizing transparency and legal compliance. Question 14. What factors determine the current and projected real estate market conditions in a specific Michigan county, and how should a licensed salesperson ethically communicate these trends to a potential seller? Option A. Focusing exclusively on the seller's desired sale price and assuring them that the market will inevitably support it, regardless of current data. Option B, relying on general national real estate news and personal opinions about the market to advise the seller on future price appreciation. Option C, providing a broad overview of real estate cycles without referencing specific local data or discussing potential market downturns. Option D, analyzing local employment rates, interest rate trends, housing inventory levels, and recent comparable sales data within the specific Michigan county, and communicating these findings objectively to the seller, including potential risks and opportunities. The correct answer is D, analyzing local employment rates, interest rate trends, housing inventory levels, and recent comparable sales data within the specific Michigan county, and communicating these findings objectively to the seller, including potential risks and opportunities. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate salesperson in Michigan to navigate the complexities of economic cycles and their impact on property values and market demand, while simultaneously upholding ethical obligations to clients. The salesperson must balance providing accurate, current market information with managing client expectations, especially when market conditions are volatile or declining. Misinterpreting or misrepresenting market trends can lead to significant financial repercussions for clients and damage the salesperson's professional reputation and license. The best approach involves a thorough, data-driven analysis of current and historical market data specific to the Michigan region, considering factors like interest rates, employment figures, inventory levels, and local economic development initiatives. This approach is correct because it aligns with the Michigan Real Estate License Law, which mandates that licensees act with honesty, integrity, and competence, providing clients with objective, well-researched information about real estate cycles and trends allows them to make informed decisions, fulfilling the fiduciary duty of care and loyalty. This proactive and informed stance helps manage client expectations realistically and ethically. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on anecdotal evidence or past personal experiences without verifying current market data. This is professionally unacceptable because it can lead to outdated or inaccurate advice, failing to meet the standard of competence required by Michigan law. Another incorrect approach is to downplay or ignore negative market trends to secure a listing or sale. This is unethical and violates the duty of honesty and fair dealing, potentially exposing the client to significant financial risk and the salesperson to disciplinary action from the Michigan Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs. Finally, presenting speculative future market movements as certainties without clear disclaimers and supporting data is also professionally unsound. This misrepresents the inherent uncertainty of market forecasting and can mislead clients into making decisions based on unrealistic expectations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes client interests through diligent research and transparent communication. This involves continuously monitoring local and regional economic indicators, understanding the nuances of the real estate market within specific Michigan communities, and clearly articulating both opportunities and risks to clients. When discussing market trends, it is crucial to present data objectively, explain its implications, and avoid making definitive predictions. Question 15. The risk matrix shows a potential conflict of interest arising when a licensed real estate salesperson in Michigan is actively marketing a seller's property and a prospective buyer, who is not currently represented by another agent, expresses strong interest in purchasing that same property. Which of the following actions best navigates this situation according to Michigan's real estate licensing laws and ethical standards? Option A. Inform the buyer that the salesperson can only represent their interests if they agree to a reduced commission from the seller. Option B. Proceed with facilitating the transaction, assuming verbal confirmation from both parties that they understand the salesperson's role is sufficient. Option C. Immediately provide both the seller and the prospective buyer with a written disclosure of the potential dual agency and obtain their informed written consent before proceeding further with the transaction. Option D. Continue to represent the seller's interests exclusively and advise the buyer to seek independent representation, even if the buyer expresses a desire for the salesperson to assist them. The correct answer is C. Immediately provide both the seller and the prospective buyer with a written disclosure of the potential dual agency and obtain their informed written consent before proceeding further with the transaction. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves navigating the complexities of agency relationships in Michigan real estate, specifically concerning potential conflicts of interest when a licensee represents both the seller and the buyer in the same transaction. Michigan law, particularly the Michigan Compiled Laws, MCL, governing real estate brokers and salespersons, mandates strict disclosure and consent requirements to protect all parties involved. The core ethical and legal imperative is to ensure informed consent and prevent misrepresentation or undisclosed conflicts. The best professional approach involves adhering strictly to Michigan's disclosure and consent requirements for dual agency. This means that upon recognizing the potential for dual agency, the licensee must immediately disclose this fact to both the seller and the prospective buyer. This disclosure must be in writing and clearly explain the implications of dual agency, including the limitations on the licensee's ability to advocate for either party's individual interests. Both parties must then provide their informed, written consent to proceed with the dual agency arrangement. This approach upholds the principles of transparency, informed consent, and fiduciary duty as required by Michigan law, ensuring that all parties understand the licensee's role and the potential limitations. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with representing both parties without full, written disclosure and consent. This failure to inform both the seller and the buyer of the dual agency relationship and obtain their explicit written agreement violates MCL 339, 2512-1A, which prohibits fraudulent or dishonest practices, and MCL 339, 2512-1C, which prohibits misrepresentation. It undermines the fiduciary duties owed to each party and creates a significant risk of legal and ethical repercussions. Another incorrect approach is to assume that verbal consent is sufficient. Michigan law requires written consent for dual agency. Relying on verbal agreements is insufficient to meet the legal standard for informed consent and leaves both the licensee and the parties vulnerable to disputes and regulatory action. This approach fails to create a clear, documented record of the parties' understanding and agreement. A further incorrect approach is to attempt to favor one party's interests over the other while acting as a dual agent. The very nature of dual agency in Michigan requires the licensee to remain neutral and avoid advocating for one party to the detriment of the other. Attempting to prioritize one party's position, even subtly, breaches the duty of impartiality and can lead to claims of misrepresentation or breach of fiduciary duty, violating the spirit and letter of Michigan's real estate regulations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes proactive disclosure and adherence to legal mandates. When a potential agency conflict arises, the first step should always be to identify the specific agency relationship that would be created. Next, consult the relevant Michigan statutes and administrative rules to understand the precise disclosure and consent obligations. Then, document all communications and agreements meticulously. Finally, err on the side of caution by providing more information and seeking clearer consent rather than less. Question 16. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a married couple in Michigan is purchasing a vacation home together. They express a desire for the property to automatically pass to the surviving spouse upon the death of one of them, without the need for probate proceedings for that transfer. They also want to ensure that if one spouse were to pass away, the other would have full control and ownership of the property. Which of the following approaches best aligns with Michigan property law and their stated objectives? Option A. Advise them to proceed with the purchase and inform them that they can decide on the exact ownership structure after closing. Option B. Recommend they take title as tenants in common, informing them that each can designate their own heirs in their will. Option C. Advise them to take title as joint tenants with right of survivorship, explaining how this structure ensures automatic inheritance and avoids probate for the surviving spouse. Option D. Suggest they enter into a long-term lease agreement for the property, with the understanding that ownership remains with the seller. The correct answer is C. Advise them to take title as joint tenants with right of survivorship, explaining how this structure ensures automatic inheritance and avoids probate for the surviving spouse. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in real estate transactions, where differing intentions regarding property ownership can lead to disputes. A real estate licensee must understand the nuances of various ownership types under Michigan law to advise clients accurately and prevent future legal complications. The challenge lies in identifying the most appropriate ownership structure based on the client's stated goals and ensuring that the chosen method aligns with Michigan's property law. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves clearly defining the client's intentions for future inheritance and management of the property, and then recommending the ownership structure that best aligns with those intentions under Michigan law. If the clients wish for the property to pass to their heirs upon the death of the surviving owner, and they want to avoid probate for that portion, establishing a joint tenancy with right of survivorship, JT-ROs, would be the most suitable option. Michigan law recognizes JT-ROs as a form of co-ownership where, upon the death of one joint tenant, their interest automatically passes to the surviving joint tenant, bypassing probate. This directly addresses the client's desire for seamless inheritance and efficient transfer of property. Incorrect approach is analysis. Recommending tenancy in common without clarifying the client's inheritance wishes is problematic. Under Michigan law, tenancy in common allows each co-owner to hold an undivided interest, but upon death, that interest passes according to the deceased owner's will or the laws of intestacy, requiring probate. This fails to meet the client's stated goal of avoiding probate for the surviving owner's inheritance. Suggesting a simple leasehold interest would be entirely inappropriate, as it grants only the right to use the property for a specified period, not ownership, and does not address the client's desire for long-term ownership and inheritance. Advising them to simply figure it out later demonstrates a failure to provide competent professional advice and a disregard for the legal implications of ownership structures, potentially exposing both the clients and the licensee to liability. Professional reasoning. Professionals should always begin by thoroughly understanding client objectives. This involves asking probing questions about their short-term and long-term plans for the property, including how they wish it to be managed and how it should be inherited. Once intentions are clear, the licensee must apply their knowledge of Michigan property law to identify the most fitting ownership structure. If the client's needs extend beyond the licensee's expertise, e.g., complex estate planning, the professional obligation includes recommending consultation with an attorney. Question 17. The performance metrics show a consistent trend of quick sales for properties listed by your brokerage in Michigan. A client, eager to sell their home rapidly, instructs you, a licensed real estate salesperson, to accept the first offer received, even if it is significantly below market value. What is the most appropriate course of action for you to take? Option A. Directly negotiate the acceptance of the offer with the buyer's agent, as the client has explicitly stated their desire for a quick sale. Option B. Advise the client to accept the offer immediately to fulfill their wish for a rapid sale, without further discussion of potential downsides. Option C. Reject the offer outright, as it is substantially below market value, and inform the client that you will only present offers that reflect fair market price. Option D. Immediately inform your supervising broker of the client's instruction and the details of the offer, seeking guidance on how to proceed ethically and legally. The correct answer is D. Immediately inform your supervising broker of the client's instruction and the details of the offer, seeking guidance on how to proceed ethically and legally. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the agent to balance the client's immediate desire for a quick sale with the broker's fiduciary duty to ensure compliance with Michigan real estate law and ethical standards. The agent must understand the scope of their authority and the broker's oversight responsibilities. The best approach involves the agent immediately informing their supervising broker about the client's request and the potential implications of accepting an offer that may not be in the client's best long-term interest, even if it meets the client's stated immediate goal. This aligns with Michigan's regulatory framework, which mandates that real estate brokers are responsible for the actions of their salespersons. By involving the broker, the agent ensures that the transaction is handled with appropriate professional oversight, adhering to the duty of care owed to the client and the legal requirements for proper disclosure and representation. The broker can then guide the agent on how to ethically and legally advise the client, potentially exploring alternative strategies, or ensuring the client fully understands the ramifications of their decision. An incorrect approach would be for the agent to directly negotiate the acceptance of the offer without consulting their broker. This bypasses the broker's supervisory role, which is a direct violation of Michigan's real estate licensing laws. Brokers are legally accountable for the conduct of their agents, and failing to involve them in significant transaction decisions undermines this oversight and exposes both the agent and the brokerage to potential disciplinary action and liability. Another incorrect approach would be for the agent to advise the client to accept the offer solely based on the client's stated desire for a quick sale, without discussing potential downsides or alternative strategies. This demonstrates a failure to uphold the agent's duty of loyalty and care to the client, which requires providing comprehensive advice that considers the client's overall best interests, not just their immediate wishes. Michigan law and professional ethics expect agents to act as fiduciaries, offering informed guidance. Finally, an incorrect approach would be for the agent to ignore the offer altogether because it doesn't meet their personal assessment of the property's value, without consulting the client or the broker. While agents should provide expert advice, the ultimate decision to accept or reject an offer rests with the seller. An agent's role is to facilitate the client's goals within legal and ethical boundaries, not to unilaterally make such decisions. This approach fails to respect the client's autonomy and the agent's role as a facilitator. Professionals should approach such situations by first understanding their role and the broker's supervisory responsibilities under Michigan law. They should then prioritize open communication with their supervising broker, ensuring all significant client requests and potential transaction decisions are reviewed. This collaborative process allows for informed decision-making that protects the client, the agent, and the brokerage, while upholding regulatory compliance and ethical standards. Question 18. Quality control measures reveal that a real estate licensee in Michigan is marketing a property that includes a substantial farmhouse, several barns, and 160 acres of actively cultivated land. The licensee has primarily focused their marketing materials on the size and potential of the farmhouse as a family residence, with only a brief mention of the surrounding acreage. Based on Michigan's real estate classification, which approach to categorizing this property is most appropriate for accurate representation and compliance? Option A. Classify the property based on its potential for future subdivision and development into smaller residential lots, irrespective of its current use. Option B. Classify the property based solely on the current zoning designation, without considering the actual use of the land or the structures. Option C. Classify the property as residential, highlighting the farmhouse as the main feature and the primary reason for potential buyer interest. Option D. Classify the property as agricultural, emphasizing the extensive cultivated land and farm structures as the primary characteristics, with the farmhouse serving as a component of the agricultural operation. The correct answer is D. Classify the property as agricultural, emphasizing the extensive cultivated land and farm structures as the primary characteristics, with the farmhouse serving as a component of the agricultural operation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate licensee to accurately identify the primary classification of a property based on its intended use and the surrounding context, which directly impacts marketing strategies, legal disclosures, and potential buyer suitability. Misclassifying a property can lead to significant legal and ethical repercussions, including misrepresentation claims and potential disciplinary action from the Michigan Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, LARA. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between the nuances of different property types, especially when a property might have characteristics of more than one category. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves classifying the property based on its predominant use and the primary intent of the owner or developer, aligning with the definitions and regulations governing real estate types in Michigan. This approach ensures that marketing efforts are targeted appropriately, disclosures are accurate, and the property is presented to suitable buyers. For instance, a property with a large parcel of land primarily used for growing crops, even if it includes a dwelling for the farmer, would be classified as agricultural. This aligns with Michigan's specific agricultural property considerations and tax implications. Incorrect approaches analysis. Classifying the property solely based on the presence of a residential structure, regardless of its primary purpose or the surrounding land use, is an incorrect approach. This fails to acknowledge that a dwelling can be incidental to a larger agricultural operation. It would lead to marketing the property as purely residential, potentially attracting buyers unsuitable for agricultural land, and overlooking the specific needs and regulations associated with agricultural properties in Michigan. Classifying the property based on its potential for future development without considering its current primary use is also incorrect. A future potential is a factor in valuation. The initial classification should reflect the property's existing character and use as defined by Michigan real estate law. This approach could misrepresent the property's current state and lead to marketing that is not aligned with its present reality. Classifying the property based on the zoning designation alone, without considering the actual use or the owner's intent, is an incomplete and potentially misleading approach. Zoning provides a framework, but the actual use and the predominant characteristic of the property are critical for accurate classification and marketing under Michigan's real estate regulations. A property might be zoned for mixed use, but currently function primarily as a single-family residence or an agricultural holding. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach property classification by first understanding the Michigan Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, LARA, guidelines and the common definitions of residential, commercial, industrial, and agricultural properties. They should then gather all relevant information about the property, including its current use, the owner's stated intent, any existing structures, the size and nature of the land, and the local zoning ordinances. The predominant use and the primary purpose of the property should be the guiding factors in determining its classification. If there is ambiguity, seeking clarification from the client or consulting with experienced colleagues or legal counsel specializing in Michigan real estate law is advisable. Question 19. System analysis indicates that a prospective buyer in Michigan is interested in a property, but has expressed concern about a potential easement mentioned in the preliminary title report. As a licensed real estate salesperson, what is the most appropriate course of action to ensure compliance with Michigan real estate regulations and ethical practice? Option A. Obtain and review the specific easement documentation. Explain its terms and potential impact on the property's use to the buyer, and advise them to consult with an attorney if they have legal concerns. Option B. Advise the buyer that easements are common and usually not a significant issue, and proceed with the transaction based on the seller's assurance that it is minor. Option C. Inform the buyer that the easement is a title issue that is outside the scope of your responsibilities and that they should handle it independently. Option D. Provide the buyer with a legal opinion on the validity and enforceability of the easement, assuring them it will not cause any problems. The correct answer is A. Obtain and review the specific easement documentation, explain its terms and potential impact on the property's use to the buyer, and advise them to consult with an attorney if they have legal concerns. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate licensee in Michigan to navigate the complexities of property rights, specifically concerning easements, while ensuring compliance with Michigan real estate law and ethical obligations. Misunderstanding or misrepresenting easement rights can lead to significant legal disputes, financial losses for clients, and damage to the licensee's reputation and license. The challenge lies in accurately identifying, understanding, and communicating the nature and implications of an easement to a buyer, ensuring they make an informed decision. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves thoroughly investigating the existence and nature of the easement. This includes reviewing the property's title commitment and any recorded documents that describe the easement, such as an easement agreement or a plat map. The licensee should then clearly and accurately explain the easement's terms, its purpose, and its potential impact on the buyer's use and enjoyment of the property. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the buyer's need for complete and accurate information regarding property rights, as mandated by Michigan's real estate licensing laws and ethical standards, which require licensees to act with honesty, integrity, and competence, and to disclose all material facts. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume the easement is minor and not worth discussing in detail, or to dismiss the buyer's concerns without proper investigation. This is professionally unacceptable because it constitutes a failure to disclose a material fact that could affect the property's value or usability. Michigan law requires the disclosure of all known material facts, and an easement is a significant encumbrance on title. Another incorrect approach is to provide a legal interpretation of the easement's validity or enforceability. Real estate licensees are not attorneys and are not qualified to provide legal advice. Offering such interpretations exceeds the scope of their license and could lead to incorrect advice, potentially resulting in legal liability for the licensee and harm to the client. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on the seller's verbal assurances about the easement without independent verification. While a seller may have a general understanding of the easement, their knowledge may be incomplete or inaccurate. A licensee has a duty to verify information and conduct due diligence, especially concerning title matters, to protect their client's interests and comply with disclosure requirements. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic approach when encountering potential encumbrances like easements. This involves 1. Identifying the potential issue buyer's inquiry about an easement. 2. Gathering all relevant documentation, title, commitment, recorded documents. 3. Understanding the terms and implications of the easement. 4. Communicating the findings clearly and accurately to the client, avoiding legal interpretations. 5. Recommending that the client seek legal counsel for any complex legal questions or concerns. This process ensures informed decision-making, protects client interests, and upholds regulatory and ethical standards. Question 20. Quality control measures reveal a property manager in Michigan is handling the return of a security deposit for a tenant who vacated a rental unit. The security deposit was $1,200. The property manager has receipts for professional cleaning totaling $250 and for repairing a damaged window blind that was clearly beyond normal wear and tear, costing $400. The property manager also wants to deduct $150 for minor scuff marks on the walls that are consistent with normal living. What is the maximum amount the property manager can legally deduct from the security deposit, and what is the remaining balance to be returned to the tenant? Option A. The property manager can deduct $800, and the remaining balance to be returned to the tenant is $400. Option B. The property manager can deduct $950, and the remaining balance to be returned to the tenant is $250. Option C. The property manager can deduct $650, and the remaining balance to be returned to the tenant is $550. Option D. The property manager can deduct $650, and the remaining balance to be returned to the tenant is $400. The correct answer is C. The property manager can deduct $650, and the remaining balance to be returned to the tenant is $550. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in property management, accurately calculating and disbursing security deposits while adhering to Michigan's specific landlord-tenant laws. The professional challenge lies in balancing the tenant's right to a full refund of their deposit, minus legitimate deductions, with the landlord's right to recover costs for damages beyond normal wear and tear. Miscalculations or improper procedures can lead to legal disputes, financial penalties for the landlord, and damage to the property manager's reputation. Strict adherence to the Michigan Landlord-Tenant Relationship Act is paramount. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves meticulously documenting all expenses and comparing them against the security deposit amount. This includes creating a detailed itemized list of any damages, supported by receipts or invoices, and ensuring that the total deductions do not exceed the security deposit. Michigan law requires landlords to provide a tenant with an itemized list of damages and the cost of repair within 30 days of the termination of the tenancy or the surrender of possession of the premises. If the cost of repair is less than the amount of the security deposit, the landlord must also return the remaining portion of the deposit. This approach directly aligns with the statutory requirements and ethical obligations of a property manager to act transparently and accountably. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves simply deducting a flat percentage for cleaning and minor repairs without specific justification or documentation. This fails to comply with Michigan law, which mandates an itemized list of actual damages and their costs. It also opens the landlord to claims of unfair deduction. Another incorrect approach is to delay the return of the security deposit beyond the 30-day statutory limit, even if the deductions are legitimate. Michigan law is clear on the time frame for returning the deposit and providing an itemized list. Exceeding this limit can result in penalties for the landlord, including the forfeiture of the right to deduct from the deposit. A third incorrect approach is to deduct for normal wear and tear. Michigan law distinguishes between damage caused by the tenant and normal deterioration that occurs over time. Deducting for normal wear and tear is a violation of the law and an unethical practice. Professional reasoning. Professionals should always prioritize understanding and strictly adhering to the specific landlord-tenant laws of the jurisdiction in which they operate. In this case, Michigan. When dealing with security deposits, a systematic process of documentation, itemization, and timely disbursement is crucial. This involves maintaining clear records of the property's condition at the start and end of the tenancy, obtaining repair estimates and invoices, and communicating transparently with the tenant. In cases of doubt, consulting legal counsel or relevant professional bodies is advisable.